Welcome back. You're watching India Tonight. Now, new US economic data is out, painting a mixed picture as growth slows while inflation remains stubbornly high. The Commerce Department reports the economy expanded at 1.4% in the fourth quarter, far below expectation and marking a sharp slowdown late in the year. For all of 2025, economic growth came in at 2.2%, down from 2.8% in 2024. At the same time, inflation pressures showed little sign of easing. The core personal consumption expenditure price index, the measure most closely watched by Federal Reserve, rose 3% year over year in December, remaining well above the Fed's 2% target. The combination of cooling growth and firm inflation could complicate Fed's path on interest rates in the months ahead. President Donald Trump weighed in. In a post on Truth Social, Trump blamed Democrats for slowing economic growth, claiming that he called a Democrat shutdown cost the U.S. at least 2 points of GDP. He also sharply criticized Federal Reserve and Chair Jerome Powell, referring to Powell as too late, calling him the worst as inflation remains above the Fed's 2% target and growth shows signs of cooling.
Yes, and more importantly, the U.S. markets are reacting sharply as we speak. There are reports that U.S. Supreme Court has ruled against Trump tariffs. While we are trying to confirm this news through our sources, the U.S. markets are sharply reacting due to this news. You can see Dow Jones, Nasdaq, as well as S&P 500 all are trading at days high. In fact, they are up around 0.5 to 1% from days low. And to discuss about US GDP as well as the news of Trump tariffs from Supreme Court, we have Arnab Das, a global macro strategist. First of all, Arnab, while we are trying to confirm through our sources that US Supreme Court decision is awaited and it is likely against Trump, I want to understand from you the kind of reaction which we are seeing in market. This will continue, and also on the US GDP, which has come lower than anticipation.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I think it's a very complicated time because, the U.S. economy is experiencing a whole host of unusual, if not unprecedented, shocks. And I think that explains, some of these quite big and sudden sharp moves that we're seeing, right? So I think, first of all, on GDP, that appears to have been much weaker than expected because the government shutdown had more of an impact than most people, I think, had expected. Inflation came in, as was being said earlier, somewhat above expectations. And, so you could say there's a kind of maybe stagflation light sort of thing going on as people consume less aggressively. Consumption growth is slowing down. The labor market has, although there was a big upside surprise recently, over a period of months, the labor market had been considerably softer than expected. So I think there's a lot of turbulence affecting the economy and causing this unusual behavior. I suppose, the slowdown in growth would push the Fed normally in the direction of easing, but the stubbornness of inflation, which may have a little bit to do with the tariffs still coming to, seeping through, would push it to delay cutting rates. And indeed, that's how the market has been repriced in the kind of front end of the.
All right, so breaking news on your screen that US Supreme Court has ruled against Trump tariffs. In fact, the global tariffs struck down by US Supreme Court as we speak. The news is flashing on your screen. I want to understand from you, Arnab, on this particular news. Now that Supreme Court has struck down the Trump's global tariffs, do you think there is going to be more reaction on markets particularly? And I want to also understand, is there still a way left whereby the Supreme Court review petition can be filed in US?
Look, so I think, what has happened here without, all the details, all the specifics having come out is that the Supreme Court has basically, in a way, I guess, rebuked the Trump administration that the use of international economic emergency powers, to impose these tariffs doesn't really, pass the smell test, right? There isn't such an emergency that this can be done in a sweeping way. So I think, what that implies is that now the Trump administration is going to have to find some other way to deal with these tariffs, right? So-called Section 232 and Section 301, by which they can continue to do the tariffs eventually, but it will take more time. There'll need to be more of an investigation and more of a process, right? So simply, on executive fiat and executive order declaring this kind of national emergency and going ahead with this, doesn't really wash. And I think it's fair to say that, what we're seeing here is a sequence of things in which the U.S. system, right, the famous checks and balances that are supposed to regulate the relationships between Congress and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court in particular, and the executive, they're coming back into play. So I think all of these things are helping to drive the market, the stock market in particular, back up, yields back up, because that implies that there'll be a bit more fiscal pressure than otherwise, right? So I think from a certain point of view, this means that the Trump agenda of reorganizing the U.S. economy and the international economy through tariffs is going to be harder to do, going to be more gradual, and it's going to allow for a more sort of, let's say, a more normal adjustment in the economy rather than this radical.
And also help us
re-engineering.
understand, does this ruling weaken US's ability to use trade as a geopolitical lever going forward, which will actually end up emboldening EMEA and also emerging market, trading partners to challenge some of these trade policies more aggressively going forward?
Look, I think, it's going to be a double-edged sword. The good news, if you want, from the point of view of those people who believe that, the U.S., whether inside the U.S. or in the rest of the world, that the U.S. is about institutions and rules rather than, deciding straight off the bat through these executive orders, it's going to be good from that point of view. But I don't think we can be so sanguine as to say that the objectives of the Trump administration in trying to reorganize the trading system and reorganize the burden sharing for geopolitical factors like national security of the U.S. and national security or European security in general, Asian security, that burden sharing, that effort, I think, is going to continue. And the underlying effort to reorganize the trading system is going to continue, like I say, with these other means. So it's going to be pushing in the Trump administration is going to be pushing in the same direction. I don't think anybody in the rest of the world harbors any illusions about that. Maybe they will have to be less radical and maybe somewhat less aggressive in the means that they use, but the direction of travel is still going to be the same. I think a lot of the uncertainty is still going to remain, although at the margin, this is good news in that, from the point of view of institutional checks and balances and rules, that is good news, but it doesn't really change like I say, the underlying direction of travel, which is a more unilateralist U.S. administration when it comes to the rest of the world.
Chances that Trump may just challenge this Supreme Court ruling going forward. Do you see that happening soon?
I mean, I think it's certainly possible that they will look to challenge. I think in the end, though, the reality is the Supreme Court has ruled. We'll have to see, what the statements are, what the opinions say, right? Which we haven't had a chance to. I certainly haven't had a chance to see that. But I would be surprised if the administration can really overturn this in any kind of direct way. I think all along they've been pointing to the use of these other means, Section 232 and Section 301, as ways of getting back to the tariffs that they want to have, even if they can't use the IEEPA powers, which is what the Supreme Court has struck down here.
What would be the impact of this on, the markets going forward already? Markets which are reeling from the weak GDP data.
Yeah, indeed. This is what I'm saying, that there's a number of shocks taking place here. Normally the U.S. is a kind of well-functioning economy and well-functioning markets that adjust gradually because, it is not the common practice of American presidents or other policymakers to do shocks, right, to make radical changes quickly. And I would say, that's where Trump started out with the Liberation Day tariffs. He rolled back from that. I wouldn't say that he tacoed, this idea of Trump always chickening out. Tariffs were higher. Now they're going to have to be, find another way to do the same sort of thing, right? So that's what I'm suggesting, that maybe we'll have a little bit less of this, kind of radical, aggressive approach towards
all right,
the.
Mr. Das, let's also welcome Mr. Raj Kamal on this discussion. Now, U.S. Supreme Court has struck down Trump's tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, which were imposed by Donald Trump, and the U.S. Supreme Court has clearly ruled that he overstepped his authority while doing so. Mr. Rao, what is your understanding of the remaining reciprocal tariffs which are still in place? Is this understanding correct, whereby the trade deals have happened like in India, there will be no impact, and the places where reciprocal tariffs were imposed, now this Supreme Court ruling means that they does not remain anymore?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yes, this is a 6-3 decision from the Supreme Court, and what the Trump administration has always said, that a loss of this kind would mean that essentially they have to completely, go back and unwind everything they have done since the Liberation Day announcement on April 1st. So it's amazing. In the last 10 months, there has been so much turmoil in world markets, so much confusion, so many threats, so many countries agreeing, so many countries walking away. The whole thing has been shut down. The whole thing has been shut down. So, as you know, this thing literally came out, and therefore we don't know how it's going to work, what's going to happen. But
question
the
from my
initial
side.
reaction is very bad news. It's very bad news for the Trump administration.
It's bad news for the Trump administration, but a very simple question from my end to you, Mr. Rao. Does this court decision to strike down all of these tariffs accelerate the time of the bilateral trade deal that US has with India, or there is no still urgency left right now after the decision that has come in from the Supreme Court?
The latter is true, because anything that these guys, India and the US, have been talking about, that's all. It's in my mind, it's all going to have to be shut down, because there really isn't. If the authority of the Trump administration was to say we are going to negotiate this very hard deal with India based on
one simple question, Mr. Rao. Does this mean status quo has been now imposed? Or that can be understood as far as India-US is concerned. It is back to 3-4% kind of a rates. If this Supreme Court decision is now implemented, is that understanding correct?
That is correct. So essentially, I know you want an answer, but what I'm saying is that we are going to go back to March 31st of 2025, the day before the Liberation Day tariffs happened. We are going to go back to before Trump announced those deals with India and all the other countries, right, when he announced the tariffs. Because that's what the 6-3 decision is. It has significant implications for the U.S. economy, the president's trade policy. We don't even know. It just came out, but that's what it is. That's what is going to happen. Everything is shut down. Everything is shut down.
All right. Also joining this conversation, we have Navroop Singh, who's IPR attorney in Delhi High Court and author cum geopolitical analyst. Mr. Singh, over to you quickly. Your reaction, about this U.S. Supreme Court striking down Trump's tariffs as illegal and beyond his capacity to impose. How do you read this decision, and moving forward, how does it impact this bilateral trade talks that India's? The news was in that they were supposed to close it as soon as March.
See, the thing is, the judgment of the U.S. Supreme Court was actually expected. I was really anticipating that the tariff would be struck down. But my view was maybe they'll say, okay, prospectively, the power of the president to impose and use emergency powers to impose these tariffs was beyond the congressional authority, so they could not have imposed it. However, what is surprising is they have ruled it, they have struck down totally. Justice Roberts has actually, if I'm reading the part of the judgment, so Justice Roberts has actually gone and the president invoked the statute to impose any tariff, let alone tariff of this magnitude and scope. No president has that power. He's actually written that for the majority judgment 6-3. But the bigger issue is what happens to the tariffs which were imposed on India, what happened to the trade deal. On that, my conscious view is, since we have already signed a joint statement, there is a joint statement issued by the two countries, and there is an agreement now that India will adhere to that joint statement. So that 18% or 25% tariffs remain because that is a sovereign agreement, kind of a sovereign arrangement.
Mr. Singh, one quick answer I want from you as far as this ruling is concerned. Now, what Supreme Court has not answered yet, the kind of refunds which Trump administration will have to make, particularly to importers. Now, one of the agencies is reporting that $170 billion is the amount which government may have to refund. However, it is left to the lower court to decide about the quantum and also the ways Trump administration will do so. And if you talk about the extent, it is much of the amount which Trump administration have to pay. And therefore, Mr. Singh, I want to understand from you, you have a clear-cut legal understanding. How does this work? Therefore, for the benefit of viewers, do you think importers are going to get money? And what about the impact on India?
See, I don't think the importers are going to get money because the Trump administration may definitely find ways to reimpose some of those tariffs. Already you already have section 232, 201, 301, 122, 336 under various statutes where the president has limited capacity to impose tariff without the Congress. And also on a broader scope, I guess this will lead to fast tracking of the trade deal between India and America because America would not want to lose this and close the trade deal as quickly as possible. This enhances India's leverage of, getting all those exemptions done, what we want, like from agriculture to dairy, that these pulses and all these should be excluded. So I believe this should give us more leverage in getting the final deal through with the Americans.
I'm going to get, because given your law background, and if I may request you to wear the lawyer's hat and help us understand, how can Trump challenge this U.S. Supreme Court strike down? I had already asked this question to our previous panelist, but if you can help us understand from a lawyer's perspective.
See, from the lawyer's perspective, this is the final decision. There is no appeal beyond it.
There is no appeal beyond it.
There is no appeal. It's done. What is done is done. The only way that for Trump administration is that they invoke other statutes which has limited scope for 90 days, 180 days, how much amount of tariff you can impose. So there are limitations to that. And for broader tariff, they will need congressional approval, which is why you have that Russia sanctions bill for 500 tariff with Lindsey Graham proposed, if you would remember, all of you would remember. So that bill is due to pass in Senate. So will the Republicans go for a newer bill which gives a broader power to the president to authorize tariffs? Will they try to invoke other statutes for reimposing some tariffs? And the third big thing is that this will lead to a faster conclusion of Indo-US deal. So wearing my lawyer's hat, this is the final judgment. There is no appeal beyond this.
Wearing a lawyer's hat, you said this is the final judgment, but there is also something called as the Reciprocal Trade Act is something that I'm reading. So can Trump, can the president force the Congress to pass this new Reciprocal Trade Act? Can he, push the Congress to do that?
the Republicans can, the president can put Republican, but the problem is the constitutional test has been, the Supreme Court has all, it has given a value judgment in the scope of presidential powers, whether they are in national interest or not, whether there is a national emergency or not to impose these kind of tariffs, and all those would make even the fence sitters in the U.S. Congress also think twice before endorsing any President Trump's agenda. It's a huge blow to him, undoubtedly.
Right. Mr. Rajkumar, I want to come to you for a quick reaction. Now that India-US trade deal was getting negotiated, the rate was 18%. But now that this ruling has come, do you think we are going to negotiate to much lower rate now, or we may just do wait and watch approach?
Well, So the answer is yes. I believe we should wait and watch. And with regard to what Mr. Singh said, I completely agree with him. To the latter part of what he said about how Trump could move some of these to other statutes, but that's very unlikely. I mean, that's not a very strong position for him. But I want to disagree with him a little bit here. I believe that Indian importers will, Indian merchants will get money back. 250 billion. It's not 170. It is $250 billion in customs duties that were collected in 2025. Half of these were under IEEPA. That means at least $125 billion will have to be reimbursed. And this is real money. And with regard to the last point about getting President Trump to get Congress to do his bidding, that is not going to happen. The 6-3 decision from the Supreme Court means that even Republicans will balk. There is no appetite in Congress to pass a tariff rule, and so essentially, this is what I said. Essentially, this whole think of it as a 10-month drama that happened that shook the world. That drama has come to an end. Everything is going to go back to the way things were before April 1st, 2025. That is the point I made before. I stand by that point.
All right. Mr. Das, I want to come to you. Markets are rejoicing this order. As soon as the order was pronounced, we have seen that U.S. market were off lows. In fact, rose as much as 1% from the day's low. I want to understand from you the impact which it is going to be on India, according to you.
Well, look, so I think, first of all, the market is telling us quite a few things about the U.S. and the rest of the world. I think, the stock market is up, as you say, the dollar is down, and bond yields are up. I think bond yields are up because there is a possibility that now the deficit is going to have to be larger because there's going to have to be more borrowing if the $250 billion, as was just said, has to be refunded. I would not be so sanguine that what the markets are saying is that everything is going to go back to square one. I think it's very clear that the Trump administration wants to go ahead with these tariffs. I think it's, the pretext of national emergency has not worked. I agree it's not going to be challenged in the Supreme Court. They're going to have to find workarounds. And I think they've been planning on these workarounds, as was said earlier, and as I also said, Section 232, 301, 122, other kinds of means. They may not be as strong, but as was also sort of being said in this debate and discussion, a number of trade deals have been signed. The Trump administration does have the authority to sign those trade deals under the fast-track authority that Congress originally gave, ceded to the executive branch. That has not been overturned, as far as we can tell, by the Supreme Court, right? That has not been challenged, actually. So maybe that'll be challenged next, and that'll be another drama. I would not be so sanguine as well that all the drama that comes from the Trump administration is over, right? This is a president who likes to shake things up. He believes he's been elected to shake things up, and he wants to shake things up because he sees serious problems in the U.S. economy and serious problems in the U.S. position in the world. I think those things are not changing, so they will try to find other ways to make these changes and to try and bring some more industry back on shore,
president who likes
partly
to-
for jobs and partly because what they're really worried about, I think, is that most of the industrial production in the world now takes place in China.
Yeah.
Much less of it, half as much industrial production in the US as in China. If there were ever a conflict, the US could not be sure of holding its own in that conflict.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the underlying issue. So
Yeah.
we're going to continue to see efforts to reindustrialize the US,
Yeah.
to remain at the technological frontier. And if necessary, the budget deficit will have to take the hit, which is why bond yields are up.
Yeah, so final word, all the panelists said that, India definitely has an upper hand over here. But final word before we wrap this discussion is, who wins in the US market? The US consumer definitely, we can see it winning after this strike. And you said that President Trump tries to shake things up. But what about the manufacturing? What about the industry?
Well, look, I think that's going to take a long time. It doesn't seem to be happening very quickly, right? I mean, the U.S. still continue to lead in technology and in AI and so on, although that's coming under question how fast that will change things. That there's a question mark about that. There's also a lot of disruption taking place because of AI in other parts of the technology sector, software, in financial services, legal services, and so on. So there's clearly change going on. That is economic and technological, that is being reflected in financial markets, that is going to happen, regardless of this tariff story, right? So I think, some countries, including India, may have a somewhat stronger bargaining position than they had before, but I'm not convinced that anybody really has the upper hand. We have to remember here, the U.S. is running a $1.2 trillion goods trade deficit with the rest of the world. Now, that of course requires the rest of the world to export to the U.S. and to finance those exports to the U.S. But it also means that many other countries are dependent on the U.S. market for a lot of their exports, for a lot of their economic activity.
Point taken, Mr. Das. Mr. Rao, as well as Mr. Singh, do stay with us because we have to take a very quick break, and after the break, we are coming back soon.